Hello, this is Dr. Grande. Today's question is, can I analyze the case of Tim Dean and Charlene Childers? Just a reminder, I'm not diagnosing anybody in this video, only speculating about what could be happening in a situation like this. If you enjoyed this video, please like it, subscribe to my channel, and consider supporting me on Patreon. Recently, I've uploaded a number of videos to Patreon, which have cryptic thumbnail titles like 46 Years to Justice, Missed Exit Murder, Polygraph of Death, Ghosts of Black Dahlia, and Quoth the Raven, Nevermore. I will put the link to Patreon in the description for this video. First, I'll look at the background of this case. I'll move to the timeline of the crime, then offer my analysis. Tim Dean lived in the state of Texas. He worked as a police officer in various places in the state. In October 2016, he became the chief of police in the small town of Sunray, Texas. Not long before this, when Tim was working at a police department about 20 minutes away from Sunray, he met an animal control officer named Charlene Childers. Tim and Charlene became romantically involved and married in March of 2018. The couple moved into a house in Sunray and raised their children from other relationships. Tim had a 3-year-old daughter, and Charlene had 3 children. 2 of Charlene's children were from a prior relationship with a man named Josh Niles. During the time when Charlene and Josh were a couple, their relationship was tumultuous. Charlene said that Josh had anger and substance use problems. Later, members of his family would say that Charlene was the one who was angry and combative. Charlene and Josh had a child together. They broke up, decided to reunite, and had another child. On one occasion, Josh was arrested and eventually pleaded guilty to unlawful imprisonment in connection with choking Charlene. After their relationship ended for the last time, Josh Niles found another love interest. Her name was Amber Washburn. Josh and Amber lived together in Sodus, New York, as Charlene continued to live in Texas along with her new husband, Tim Dean. Charlene had custody of the 2 children she had with Josh and would keep them during the school year in Texas. Josh would care for the children at his home in New York for most of the summer. Moving back to the relationship between Tim and Charlene, 2 months after Tim and Charlene married, Charlene recorded video of Tim slapping his 3-year-old daughter. Charlene posted this video to Facebook. Eventually, the authorities found out. Tim was charged with third-degree injury to a child, which is a felony. Tim lost custody of his daughter. She went to live with her mother, but that wasn't the end of Tim's problems. The criminal charge put Tim and Charlene in a tough position as far as Charlene's children. Tim lived in the same house as the children, and this was not good as far as Charlene retaining custody. Around the same time, Josh was on his way to Texas to pick up the children for the summer, as per his custody arrangement. Josh took them back to Sodus, New York, and filed for custody. In August of 2018, he was awarded custody. Charlene had desperately tried to avoid this. She even told the court that she would divorce Tim Dean, thereby solving the problem because he would no longer be around her children. I can picture a situation where the judge asks Charlene about Tim Dean, and she responds with something like, "Husband? What husband? I don't see any husband." The court essentially told Charlene to get back in touch with them after she divorced Tim Dean, and the case would be re-examined. She would not be able to regain custody that school year, no matter who she divorced and how many times she divorced them. Before moving to the timeline of the crime, let's hear a word from today's sponsor, Factor. Factor makes meeting your nutrition goals easier than ever by delivering fresh, never frozen, dietitian-approved meals right to your doorstep. With Factor, there is no preparation and no mess. Factor cuts out stressful meal planning and extensive preparation, so meals come together in minutes. It really takes the guesswork out of what to make for breakfast, lunch, or dinner. Factor meals arrive prepared and ready to eat in 2 minutes, even faster than ordering takeout. In a wellness market that is packed with diet plans that are unrealistic, Factor is a welcomed and new approach to prepared food. Factor meals include premium ingredients with integrity. In order to stay productive, I am always mindful of how I use my time. Factor helps me to stay efficient by cutting down on grocery trips and cooking. This means more time for making videos. Factor is my go-to lunch or dinner solution when time is of the essence. head to go.factor75.com/drgrande60 and use my code drgrande60 to get 60% off your first Factor box. That's 60% off your first Factor box at go.factor75.com/drgrande60, code drgrande60. Now moving to the timeline of the crime. Disappointed by her recent custody defeat, Charlene devised a plan to get her children back using a method that would not involve her divorcing Tim Dean, but rather divorcing Josh Niles from his existence on the planet. She told Tim that she wanted him to kill Josh because she needed her children back. For some reason, Charlene and Tim invited another Sunray police officer named Grande into their conspiracy. Grande agreed to rent a vehicle for Tim, which would allow Tim to drive to New York and commit the murder without having a vehicle connected to him directly. After the vehicle was rented, Tim loaded it with handguns, a rifle, and a shotgun, and started his drive to Sodus, New York. On October 20, 2018, Tim Dean became stuck on a concrete culvert on the side of a road in the town of Emporia, Kansas. This is about 1,200 miles away from Sodus, New York. Tim called 911 sometime around 4 a.m. When the police responded, Tim said that he became lost looking for a gas station and tried to make a U-turn. He pulled too far off to the right and became stuck. When the police officer asked him where he was going, Tim said that he was just driving. He said, "My life has gone to blank lately." Tim indicated that he was living out of his car. The responding officer thought this was curious that Tim rented a vehicle for this purpose. Tim explained that the starter was acting up on the car he owned. During the conversation with the officer, Tim mentioned that he had a pending divorce and that he had been fired from his job as a police officer after being arrested. Tim made it sound like he was investigating corruption involving high-profile and powerful figures. They retaliated against him because of his incredible courage. I guess Tim thought that this sounded more glamorous than saying he was fired for slapping his 3-year-old daughter in the face. Tim's rental vehicle was towed. He tried to rent another one, but he did not have a credit card. Charlene drove to Kansas and helped Tim rent another vehicle. On October 22, 2018, at around 2 p.m., Tim Dean parked not far from the residence where Josh Niles and his girlfriend Amber Washburn lived in Sodus, New York. Tim encountered Josh right outside the house. Josh leaned against the tailgate of his truck and had what appeared to be a brief, casual conversation with Tim. At about 2:07 p.m., Tim produced a firearm and shot Josh just as Amber was pulling into the driveway. Killing Amber was not part of the plan, but Tim killed her anyway by shooting her one time in the head. He turned his attention back to Josh and shot him several more times, killing him. Amber had shifted her vehicle into reverse before she was shot. The vehicle moved backward out of her driveway and into the driveway of a neighbor across the street before coming to rest against another vehicle. Amber's 4-year-old son was in her vehicle. He was unharmed. The police started their investigation. They found video of a man conducting surveillance of the house where Josh and Amber lived. A black ski mask was found in the grass not far from the murder scene. DNA found on the mask belonged to Tim Dean, but the police would not get those results right away. The police found out about Tim's adventure in Kansas, which led them to Grande, who rented the vehicle which became stuck. Grande initially denied involvement, but eventually confessed to his part in the crime and implicated both Tim and Charlene. Charlene was interviewed by the police and confessed that the murder of Josh was her idea. All 3 conspirators were charged in connection with the murders. Charlene was offered a plea bargain. She would plead guilty to first-degree manslaughter in exchange for testifying against Tim Dean. She would eventually be sentenced to 28 years in prison. Tim Dean was convicted of all charges, including 1 count of first-degree murder and 2 counts of second-degree murder. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Grande was convicted of second-degree conspiracy and sentenced to 1 to 3 years in prison. Now moving to my analysis. Here are my thoughts on a few areas that stood out to me in this case. Item number 1. Tim Dean was not well suited for police work, and I don't mean just because of the murder part. He was never good at it. He struggled in the police academy, but his father was a police officer, and Tim was able to leverage his father's reputation to advance his own career. Tim was described as somebody who was always trying to be a tough guy. As I mentioned, Tim was the chief of police in the town of Sunray, Texas. This town's population is only about 1,900 people. The police department only had 3 officers, including Tim Dean. Tim demanded everybody show him respect because of his important position, but people routinely mocked him for being grandiose and socially awkward. He was never able to prove his superiority and probably felt ineffective. Item number 2, Tim Dean was arrested for slapping his daughter, as I mentioned, but he may have harmed her on other occasions as well. It appears as though it made him feel powerful to intimidate his 3-year-old daughter. During the incident that led to his arrest, his daughter was sitting at the kitchen table, and Tim was displeased with her because she was not eating her food. Before he slapped her, he was standing over her screaming while wearing a pistol. He demanded that she respond to him by saying, "Yes, sir," which she did. I think what may have happened here is that Tim was unable to intimidate or impress other people. Therefore, he targeted his daughter, a person who was defenseless. She was someone who he could dominate completely and from whom he could demand respect. Item number 3, Charlene recorded the incident involving Tim's daughter in order to show people how he was a terrible romantic partner. Charlene did not record the video to protect Tim's daughter. It was all about Charlene. She viewed his violence toward his daughter and thought to herself, "This is really terrible for me. I want people to feel sorry for me." This recording, of course, led to Tim's arrest and ultimately to the double murder. It was all put in motion due to Charlene's self-centeredness. Item number 4, one would think that Tim would be very angry at Charlene for recording him committing a felony, but in reality, he was desperate to keep her as a romantic partner. He would have done anything for her and, of course, ultimately committed homicide for her. When Charlene was married to Tim, she also had a boyfriend in Sodus, New York, named Casey Miller. Casey had been convicted in connection with having a sexual relationship with Charlene when she was a minor. Casey was not involved in the murders. He had an alibi for when the crime was being committed. It appears as though Casey was obsessed with Charlene. When she was in jail awaiting trial, he visited her 60 times. It sounds like he believed they really had a future together, perhaps forgetting about the decades in prison part, or maybe that was a plus for him because he always knew where she would be. Charlene also maintained a relationship with Tim when she was in jail, writing him 40 letters in which she professed her undying love. So here we see that Charlene was really in demand. She was married to Tim, Casey was her boyfriend, and both of them were obsessed with her. Item number 5, the conspirators involved in this case should have known that they would be caught. Both Tim and Braun had been police officers, and Charlene had been an animal control officer. They had made a number of mistakes in their homicidal plan. Tim left his cell phone on for a good part of his trip, which showed him making his way across the country toward New York. And of course, he called the police after getting stuck on the side of the road in Kansas. This incident where he became stuck was Tim's big chance to rethink his plan. But even with this setback, the conspiracy moved forward. I think this shows just how determined both Tim and Charlene were to see Josh Niles dead. Tim wanted to make sure he didn't lose Charlene, and Charlene wanted custody of her children. Item number 6, what do I think happened in this case? This is just a theory, my opinion. It appears as though Charlene Childers had a strong sense of entitlement. She believed that she deserved to have anything and everything she wanted. She was accustomed to having men follow her commands. Therefore, when she lost custody, she ordered Tim to commit murder. She gained additional leverage because Tim may have felt responsible for their situation and was looking to make amends. In addition, he had low self-esteem. He was always looking to convince people that he was powerful and important. This was his chance to impress Charlene with his ability to get the job done. Charlene did not think that she would ever be held accountable, and Tim, perhaps, didn't really care one way or the other. He was nothing short of reckless, and it almost looked as though he wanted to be caught. He just made so many mistakes, and it's hard to imagine that a police officer would ever think those mistakes would not come back to haunt them. Now moving to my final thoughts. This case exemplifies how negative consequences do not always prevent crime. This case involved conspirators who either knew or should have known they would be arrested. They had every opportunity to stop, and they had legal channels available to them to address their concerns. Yet they chose to kill anyway. They deceived themselves into believing that their love would conquer all, when all it really did was bring pain and death to innocent people. Those are my thoughts in the case of Tim Dean and Charlene Childers. Please put any opinions and thoughts in the comment section. They always generate an interesting dialogue. As always, I hope you found my analysis of this topic to be informative. Thanks for watching.